In the shadowed halls of Ravenwood Manor, a scream pierces the night. Sir Henry Ashbourne lies dead, a cryptic cipher clutched in his bloodied hand, the door locked from within. Who among the club of mysteries, a botanist with poison at her fingertips, a gambler with debts unpaid, a heiress with a buried past, or a war hero with a trembling secret, wielded the fatal blade? Miss Jane Marple, with her quiet gaze and razor-sharp mind, steps into a web of lies, where every clue hides a question and every answer masks a killer. Can she unravel the truth before the shadows strike again?
Chapter 1. The Setup. The Invitation to Ravenwood Manor. The autumn of 1928 draped the Sussex countryside in a golden chill, and Ravenwood Manor stood resolute, its ivy-clad stone walls guarding secrets older than the oaks that lined its drive. The estate belonged to Sir Henry Ashbourne, a wealthy widower nearing 60 whose eccentricities were as renowned as his fortune. His latest venture was the Club of Mysteries, a peculiar assembly of minds drawn to puzzles, ciphers, and the macabre. This weekend marked the club's inaugural gathering, and among the invited was Miss Jane Marple, the unassuming spinster from St. Mary Mead, whose keen eyes missed nothing. By dusk, the guests arrived at the iron gates of the manor. Dr. Evelyn Carter, a botanist with a sharp tongue and a fascination with rare poisons, stepped from her chauffeured car, her gloved hands clutching a leather satchel. Mr. Lionel Gray, a retired barrister with a gambler's restless hands, arrived on foot, his coat dusted with road dirt. Mrs. Beatrice Langley, a widowed heiress whose elegance masked a shadowed past, swept in with a fur stole and a guarded smile. Captain Arthur Ramsay, a decorated war hero with a nervous tic in his left eye, drove up in a rattling motor car. Miss Clara Vernon, a young novelist whose Gothic tales thrilled London's literary circles, clutched her notebook like a shield. Sir Henry's secretary, Mr. Philip Trent, a wiry man with darting eyes, greeted each with a strained smile, while his niece, Miss Laura Ashbourne, a pale beauty of 22, played the gracious hostess. Dinner was served at 8 p.m. in the oak-paneled dining room, where candlelight flickered on crystal and silver. Sir Henry presided, his voice rich with mischief as he spoke of the Club of Mysteries. "Tonight," he said, raising a glass, "we embark on a grand puzzle, a test of wits that shall bind us." His eyes gleamed as he hinted at a secret locked in his study, a cipher, perhaps, or something more. Miss Marple, seated quietly at the table's end, noted the unease beneath the polite laughter. Mrs. Langley's fingers trembled as she sipped her wine when Sir Henry mentioned debts long unpaid. Captain Ramsay's tic quickened. Clara Vernon's pen scratched furiously in her notebook, pausing only when Sir Henry glanced her way. By 10 p.m., the guests retired to their rooms, the manor's corridors creaking under their steps. Miss Marple, her knitting bag in hand, lingered by the fire, observing Philip Trent's hurried whispers to Laura in the hall. The air was thick with unspoken rivalries, and as she climbed the stairs, Miss Marple murmured to herself, "A village is no different than a manor. Every heart hides its own riddle."
Chapter 2. The Crime. A Scream in the Night. The clock in Ravenwood Manor's great hall had just struck 2 a.m. when a scream tore through the silence, sharp and raw, echoing off the stone walls. Miss Jane Marple, roused from a light sleep in her modest guest room, sat up, her heart steady despite the hour. She lit a candle, donned her shawl, and stepped into the corridor, where the air was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax. Other doors creaked open, and disheveled figures emerged, their faces pale in the flickering light. Philip Trent, Sir Henry's secretary, stumbled from the staircase, his nightshirt askew, his eyes wide with panic. "It's Sir Henry," he gasped, leading the group to the study on the ground floor. The heavy oak door was locked, but a spare key hung on a hook nearby, a detail Miss Marple noted with a raised brow. Trent fumbled it into the lock, and the door swung open to reveal a grim tableau. Sir Henry Ashbourne lay slumped over his mahogany desk, his silver hair matted with blood. A letter opener, its handle ornate with a carved raven, protruded from his chest, pinning a blood-stained cipher to the blotter. The ink bottle had tipped, spilling black across papers and pooling like a shadow. A single window stood ajar, admitting a chill breeze, though the sheer drop to the gravel below seemed impassable. The room smelled faintly of lavender, an odd note amidst the metallic tang of blood. Dr. Evelyn Carter, her medical instincts overriding her shock, knelt beside the body. "He's dead," she declared, her voice clinical. "Stabbed, likely within the last half hour given the warmth." She pointed to the clock on the mantel, stopped at 2:03 a.m. Captain Ramsay, his tic more pronounced, muttered about intruders, while Mrs. Langley clutched her robe, her eyes darting to the shadows. Clara Vernon stood frozen, her notebook clutched to her chest, and Laura Ashbourne stifled a sob, leaning against Trent. Lionel Gray, his barrister's composure fraying, demanded the police be called, though the nearest station was an hour away in the village of Ashford. Miss Marple, unnoticed in her plain woolen dress, moved quietly about the room. She observed the tipped ink bottle, its contents still wet, and a torn cufflink on the rug, monogrammed with A.R. A cigarette burn scarred the desk's edge, though Sir Henry, she recalled, despised smoking. The cipher, half-written, bore cryptic symbols and the word legacy scrawled in haste. "Curious," she murmured, as her fingers brushed her knitting bag as she memorized the scene. Inspector Hargreaves would not arrive until dawn. Until then, Ravenwood Manor was a locked puzzle, its secrets sealed within its walls, and its guests.
Chapter 3. The Arrival. Miss Marple takes the stage. Dawn broke over Ravenwood Manor, painting the Sussex hills in hues and amber and gray, but the warmth did little to dispel the chill within. The guests, sleepless and strained, gathered in the drawing-room, their whispers heavy with suspicion. Sir Henry Ashbourne's murder hung over them like a storm cloud, and the locked study, now cordoned off by Philip Trent's nervous insistence, held its secrets fast. The local constable, Inspector Hargreaves, arrived at 7:15 a.m., his heavy boots thudding on the manor's polished floors. A bluff man with a walrus mustache, he surveyed the scene with a mix of authority and impatience, dismissing the guests' frayed nerves as hysterical nonsense. Miss Jane Marple, invited to Ravenwood as a courtesy due to her quiet reputation for unraveling village intrigues in St. Mary Mead, entered the study unobtrusively, her knitting bag slung over her arm. Her presence drew little attention. To Hargreaves she was merely a prim spinster, out of place among the manor's grandeur. Yet her eyes, sharp as needles, missed nothing. She noted the ajar window, its latch loose but unforced, and the sheer drop to the gravel below, undisturbed by footprints. The cigarette burn on the desk's edge caught her attention again, its edges crisp, suggesting recent use. The torn cufflink, monogrammed A.R., lay where she'd seen it, untouched by the constable's cursory inspection. Captain Arthur Hastings, a latecomer to the Club of Mysteries and a friend of Sir Henry's, arrived shortly after Hargreaves, his motor car spluttering to a halt at 7:30 a.m. A genial man with a soldier's bearing, he was visibly shaken to learn of the murder, having missed the night's chaos. Introduced to Miss Marple by Laura Ashbourne, he found her unassuming demeanor oddly reassuring. "A dreadful business, Miss Marple," he said, mopping his brow. Sir Henry was a good man, if a touch eccentric. "Indeed, Captain," she replied, her voice soft but precise. "But it is in the eccentricities that we often find the truth. I observe that people reveal themselves in the smallest gestures." Hastings, charmed by her calm authority, offered to assist, his notebook ready to record her observations. Miss Marple lingered by the desk, her fingers tracing the air above the blood-stained cipher. The word legacy stood out, its ink smudged as if written in haste. The faint lavender scent she'd noted earlier lingered, though none of the guests admitted to wearing it. Hargreaves, barking orders to seal the manor's exits, overlooked these details, but Miss Marple tucked them away, her mind already weaving a pattern from the threads of the night's horror. As the morning wore on, she requested a quiet corner to confer with Hastings, her gaze drifting to the guests huddled in the drawing-room. "This manor," she murmured, "is a village unto itself. And in every village, Captain, there is a story waiting to be told."
Chapter 4. The questions begin. Alibis and observations. By mid-morning, Ravenwood Manor's drawing-room was a crucible of unease, its velvet curtains and polished mahogany at odds with the grim purpose of the gathering. Inspector Hargreaves, his notebook open and his mustache twitching with impatience, began questioning the guests about their whereabouts at 2 a.m. when Sir Henry Ashbourne met his end. His brusque manner elicited stiff responses, and the air grew thick with half-truths. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically, observed the proceedings with the quiet intensity of a hawk. Captain Hastings, at her side, scribbled notes, his earnest face furrowed with concentration. Miss Marple had requested to sit in on the interviews, a request Hargreaves granted with a dismissive wave, assuming her a harmless busybody. She began with Dr. Evelyn Carter, whose cool demeanor belied the faint tremor in her hands. "I was in my room reading Flora Toxica until 2:30, Dr. Carter said, her voice clipped. "Botanical journals, Inspector, are my solace." Miss Marple noted the pristine state of the book on Dr. Carter's nightstand, its pages uncreased, and the faint scent of lavender on her shawl. Mr. Lionel Gray, the retired barrister, claimed he was asleep, though his shoes, caked with fresh mud, sat conspicuously by his door. "A restless night, perhaps a walk in the garden," he muttered when pressed, his fingers fidgeting with a silver cigarette case. Mrs. Beatrice Langley admitted to wandering the halls at 1:45 a.m., unable to sleep. "The manor's gloom unsettles me," she said, her eyes avoiding Trent's. Captain Ramsay swore he was in the billiard room, practicing shots until 2 a.m., but Miss Marple recalled the billiard cue, untouched and dust-covered. Miss Clara Vernon, clutching her notebook, insisted she was writing in her room, though her ink-stained fingers suggested frantic activity. Philip Trent claimed he was in the library, cataloging Sir Henry's papers, yet the library's lamp was cold to the touch. Laura Ashbourne, pale and trembling, said she was in her bedroom, alone, though her lavender perfume was unusually potent, as if freshly applied. Miss Marple's questions were gentle but piercing. To Laura, she said, "My dear, your scent is charming, but was it so strong last night?" Laura blushed, stammering about a spilled bottle. To Ramsay, she remarked, "The billiard room is so quiet at night, yet the table seemed unused." His tic quickened, but he offered no reply. To Trent she asked about the library's chill, and his eyes darted to the floor. As Hargreaves droned on, Miss Marple's mind catalogued discrepancies: the mud on Gray's shoes, the cold lamp, the untouched billiard cue. She leaned toward Hastings, whispering, "Alibis, Captain, are like knitting patterns. One drop stitch unravels the whole."
The manor's secrets were beginning to fray, and Miss Marple's gray cells were already at work, threading the clues into a tapestry only she could yet see.
Chapter 5. The Red Herrings, the Obvious Suspect. By noon, Ravenwood Manor's atmosphere had thickened with suspicion, the guests' polite facades crumbling under the weight of Inspector Hargreaves' relentless questioning. The drawing room, once a haven of civility, now felt like a courtroom, with every glance and gesture scrutinized. Hargreaves, his walrus mustache bristling, had zeroed in on Philip Trent, Sir Henry Ashbourne's nervy secretary, as the prime suspect. A search of Trent's room, conducted with the heavy-handed zeal of a man eager to close the case, uncovered a damning piece of evidence. A ledger hidden beneath a loose floorboard, showing Sir Henry had lent Trent £5,000, a debt unpaid and unmentioned. The guests, huddled in whispered knots, seized on this, their murmurs painting Trent as a desperate man driven to murder. "Debts and access to the study," Hargreaves barked, brandishing the ledger before Trent, whose sallow face drained further. "You were in the library, you say, but the lamp was cold. Explain yourself." Trent stammered, his thin hands twisting. "I was loyal to Sir Henry. I'd never harm him. The ledger, it's not what it seems." His voice cracked, and Laura Ashburn, standing near the window, turned away, her shoulders trembling. Miss Jane Marple, seated quietly with her knitting, observed the scene with calm detachment. To Captain Hastings, who fidgeted beside her, she murmured, "The inspector is a gardener who sees only the weeds, not the roots." She had examined the ledger earlier, with Hargreaves' grudging permission, and noted its ink was fresh, its entries too neat compared to Sir Henry's meticulous but faded handwriting elsewhere. "A clumsy forgery," she whispered to Hastings, "meant to mislead." Her attention shifted to another clue overlooked by Hargreaves, a scrap of paper found in the study, tucked beneath a heavy volume of The Complete Angler. It bore the initials L.G., Lionel Gray, perhaps, and a cryptic phrase, "The raven flies at midnight." Gray, the barrister with muddied shoes, had been evasive about his nighttime walk, and Miss Marple recalled his cigarette case, though the burn on Sir Henry's desk was fresher than his alibi suggested. She also pondered the torn cufflink marked A.R., which Captain Ramsay had yet to explain convincingly. These threads, seemingly disparate, were beginning to form a pattern in her mind. As Hargreaves pressed Trent further, the secretary's composure frayed, his eyes darting to Laura for support. The other guests, Dr. Carter, Mrs. Langley, Miss Vernon, and Ramsay, watched with varying degrees of unease, their own secrets simmering beneath the surface. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, a counterpoint to the rising tension. She said to Hargreaves, "Red herrings are the killer's favorite bait, but I am not so easily hooked."
Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The Torn Cufflink. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through Ravenwood Manor's leaded windows, casting long shadows across the drawing room where the guests remained, restless under Inspector Hargreaves's watchful eye. The air was taut, as if the manor itself held its breath, waiting for the next revelation. Philip Trent, still reeling from his interrogation, sat slumped in a corner, his face ashen, while the others avoided his gaze, their own secrets weighing heavily. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting needles moving with metronomic precision, appeared absorbed in her work, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. To Captain Hastings, seated beside her with his notebook open, she was a beacon of calm amid the storm. Miss Marple's attention returned to the torn cufflink, monogrammed A.R., which she had persuaded Hargreaves to let her examine more closely. The small silver item, found on the study's rug near Sir Henry Ashbourne's body, bore the initials of Captain Arthur Ramsay. During a quiet moment, as Hargreaves busied himself with telephoning the station, Miss Marple approached Ramsay, who stood by the fireplace, his nervous tic more pronounced under her gentle scrutiny. "Captain Ramsay," She began, her voice soft but deliberate. "This cuff-link is yours, I presume?" She held it up, its silver catching the light. Ramsay's face tightened, his hand instinctively touching his sleeve. "Yes, it's mine," he admitted, his voice gruff. "Lost it yesterday during a disagreement with Sir Henry. He accused me of forging a war medal of all things. We argued in his study, around noon. Must have torn off then." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. A heated exchange, no doubt. Yet the cufflink was found near the desk where Sir Henry was stabbed at 2 a.m. Curious, is it not? Ramsay's tick flickered, but he insisted he was in the billiard room at the time of the murder, practicing shots. Miss Marple recalled the dust-covered billiard cue untouched and filed the discrepancy away. Her mind turned to another detail. The study's clock stopped at 2:03 a.m., which she had checked against her own pocket watch and found to be 5 minutes slow. "Time," she murmured to Hastings, "is a witness that cannot lie, yet it is often misunderstood." The clock's discrepancy suggested the murder occurred closer to 1:58 a.m., narrowing the window of opportunity. She also revisited the faint lavender scent in the study, which Laura Ashburn had attributed to a spilled bottle, though her explanation felt rehearsed. As the guests dispersed for a tense luncheon, Miss Marple lingered, her gaze settling on the scrap of paper with LG and "The Raven Flies at Midnight." Was it a clue or another distraction? To Hastings, she whispered, "The smallest details, Captain, are like stitches in a tapestry. Pull one, and the whole design may unravel."
Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. Secrets Unraveled. By late afternoon, Ravenwood Manor's grandeur felt oppressive, its high ceilings and shadowed corridors amplifying the unease that gripped the Club of Mysteries. The guests, confined to the manor by Inspector Hargreaves' orders, gathered in the dining room for a strained luncheon, their polite exchanges brittle with suspicion. The clink of cutlery and the murmur of forced conversation masked deeper tensions. But Miss Jane Marple, seated at the table's edge with her knitting bag, observed each guest with the quiet precision of a botanist cataloging rare specimens. Captain Hastings, ever her loyal shadow, sat beside her, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. Inspector Hargreaves, still fixated on Philip Trent, had retreated to the study to review evidence, leaving the guests to stew in their unease. Miss Marple, however, used the moment to probe deeper, her gentle questions cutting through the fog of deception. During a lull in the meal, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her composure fraying, spoke sharply to a servant, then caught Miss Marple's eye. "This is intolerable," she said, her voice trembling, "to be treated like criminals." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, but her mind was on Mrs. Langley's trembling hands, which had gripped her wine-glass too tightly when Sir Henry's name was mentioned earlier. After luncheon, Miss Marple invited Mrs. Langley for a private word in the conservatory, sensing a crack in her polished facade. "My dear," Miss Marple said softly, "you seem burdened. Did Sir Henry's death stir old wounds?" Mrs. Langley's eyes widened, and under Miss Marple's gentle pressure, she confessed to an affair with Sir Henry years ago, ended bitterly when he refused to marry her. "He promised me everything, then cast me aside. I hated him, but I didn't kill him." Her voice broke, and Miss Marple noted the flush of her cheeks, wondering if shame or guilt lay beneath. Later, in the drawing room, Mr. Lionel Gray, the barrister, grew agitated when Miss Marple casually mentioned his muddy shoes. "You were out late, Mr. Gray, despite claiming to be asleep," she remarked. Gray's cigarette case clattered to the table as he admitted to gambling debts Sir Henry had threatened to expose. "He held it over me," he muttered, "but murder? Preposterous." His restless hands betrayed his nerves, and Miss Marple recalled the cigarette burn on the desktop. Miss Clara Vernon, the novelist, was next, cornered by Miss Marple near the library. Under her calm gaze, Clara revealed a staggering secret. She was Sir Henry's illegitimate daughter, acknowledged only recently. "He promised to include me in his will," she said, her voice bitter, but he kept delaying. Her ink-stained fingers clutched her notebook, and Miss Marple wondered if the cipher on Sir Henry's desk marked "Legacy" related to this revelation. To Hastings, Miss Marple confided, "Secrets are like weeds, Captain. They choke the truth. The scent of lavender, the forged ledger, the cufflink, and the cryptic note with LG swirled in her mind. As evening fell, she sensed the killer's desperation growing, hidden among the tangled lies of Ravenwood's guests."
Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point, a Confession. As twilight settled over Ravenwood Manor, the air grew heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. The guests, weary from a day of interrogations and suspicion, retreated to their rooms or lingered in the drawing room, their eyes avoiding one another. The manor's grandeur, its chandeliers and tapestries, seemed to mock their disquiet, and the distant howl of a wind through the Sussex hills added a mournful note. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting needles idle for once, sat by the conservatory's glass walls, where moonlight cast eerie patterns on the flagstones. Captain Hastings, ever attentive, joined her, sensing her mind was at work. Miss Marple had noticed Laura Ashburn's increasing agitation throughout the day, her lavender perfume a constant presence, her hands fidgeting with a lace handkerchief. Seeking a quiet moment, Miss Marple invited Laura to join her in the conservatory, away from the others' prying eyes. "My dear," Miss Marple began, her voice gentle as a lullaby, "you carry a burden. Will you not share it? The heart, like a village, keeps no secrets forever." Laura's composure crumbled, her eyes welling with tears. She sank onto a wicker chair, her voice barely a whisper. "I heard something last night, at 10 minutes to 2, just before Uncle Henry was killed." She described overhearing a heated argument from the study, a man's voice sharp with anger, though she couldn't see who it was. "I thought it was Philip, Mr. Trent," she admitted, her cheeks flushing. "I love him, Miss Marple, and I feared he'd done something terrible." She clutched her handkerchief, her lavender scent overpowering, as if reapplied to mask another odor, perhaps fear. Miss Marple listened, her expression kind, but her mind alert. Laura's confession narrowed the timeline. The argument at 1:50 a.m., followed by the scream at 2 a.m., suggested a swift crime. Yet Laura's perfume raised questions. "Your scent, my dear," Miss Marple said softly, "was it so strong in the study last night?" Laura stammered, claiming a nervous habit of reapplying it, but her eyes flickered with unease. Back in the drawing room, Miss Marple shared her thoughts with Hastings. "The killer is a gardener planting false blooms, but the roots of truth are stubborn." The manor's secrets were unraveling, and Miss Marple sensed the killer's fear growing in the shadows.
Chapter 9. The Second Crime. A Narrow Escape. The night descended on Ravenwood Manor like a velvet curtain, its silence broken only by the creak of ancient timbers and the distant wail of wind across the Sussex Downs. The guests, confined by Inspector Hargreaves' orders, moved like ghosts through the candlelit corridors, their nerves frayed by the specter of Sir Henry Ashbourne's murder. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag at her side, sat in the drawing-room, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the mounting dread. Captain Hastings, ever her faithful companion, hovered nearby, his notebook filled with scribbled observations. At 9:15 p.m., a sharp cry echoed from the upper floor, shattering the uneasy quiet. The guests rushed toward the sound, converging on Dr. Evelyn Carter's room.
There, they found the botanist slumped on her bed, her face pale, a glass of sherry spilled on the bedside table, its amber liquid pooling on the floor. A faint chemical odor hung in the air. Miss Marple, arriving with her measured step, noted the scene. Dr. Carter's breathing was shallow but steady, her pulse weak but present. "She lives," Miss Marple murmured, her eyes scanning the room. Captain Ramsay, his tick twitching violently, shouted for a doctor, but Dr. Carter, stirring faintly, rasped, "Poison. Atropine." Her satchel, open on the dresser, revealed a vial of the deadly alkaloid, half empty. Inspector Hargreaves, summoned from his makeshift office in the study, declared it an attempted murder. "The killer's still among us," he barked, eyeing Philip Trent, whose earlier implication made him a convenient scapegoat. Trent, trembling, protested his innocence, while Laura Ashburn clung to his arm, her lavender scent sharp in the close air. Miss Marple knelt by the bedside, her fingers brushing the sherry glass. She noticed faint lipstick marks on its rim, a soft pink shade Dr. Carter never wore. "Curious," she said softly to Hastings, "that a woman who eschews cosmetics should leave such a trace." She also observed a single muddy footprint near the door, too small for Gray's boots, but matching the size of Clara Vernon's delicate shoes. The atropine vial bore no fingerprints, wiped clean, a meticulous touch. As Dr. Carter was tended by Laura and Mrs. Langley, Miss Marple confided to Hastings, "The killer grows reckless, Captain. They meant to silence Dr. Carter, who perhaps saw too much." She recalled the botanist's presence near the study the previous night, her satchel always close. Had she witnessed something during the 1:50 a.m. argument Laura overheard? The lavender scent, the forged ledger, the cufflink, and the cryptic LG note swirled in Miss Marple's mind, each a thread in a tightening noose. The manor's walls seemed to close in, and Miss Marple sensed the killer's desperation. "Fear," she whispered, "is a poor seamstress. It leaves loose ends." The stage was set for her final move.
Chapter 10. The Trap. The Gathering. The morning after Dr. Evelyn Carter's poisoning, Ravenwood Manor simmered with a palpable dread, its once stately halls now a stage for suspicion and fear. The guests, confined by Inspector Hargreaves' orders, gathered in the drawing-room at 10 a.m., their faces drawn and eyes wary. The chandelier's light cast harsh shadows, amplifying the tension. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag at her feet, stood near the fireplace, her diminutive figure commanding an authority none dared question. Captain Hastings, clutching his notebook, stood by her side, his loyalty unwavering. Miss Marple had requested the gathering, a request Hargreaves granted with a grudging nod, underestimating her as a meddling spinster. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and steady, "a crime has been committed, two, in fact, and the truth lies among us, hidden in plain sight." Her eyes, sharp as cut glass, swept the room. Philip Trent, pale and fidgeting, Laura Ashburn, clutching her handkerchief, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, her lips tight, Captain Ramsay, his tick betraying his nerves, Lionel Gray, gripping his cigarette case, Clara Vernon, her notebook clutched like a talisman, and Dr. Carter, weak but alert, propped in an armchair. She began with the study's locked door, the key inside, suggesting an inside job. "Yet," she said, "a duplicate key, easily taken from Sir Henry's desk, could create the illusion." She spoke of the cufflink, monogrammed A.R., which Ramsay admitted losing during his noon argument with Sir Henry, yet its placement near the body suggested planting. The cigarette burn on the desk, fresh despite Sir Henry's hatred of smoking, pointed to Gray, whose alibi of sleeping was contradicted by muddy shoes. The forged ledger, implicating Trent, was too neatly written, its ink too fresh. The lavender scent linked to Laura seemed a deliberate misdirection, as did the cryptic note with LG and "The Raven Flies at Midnight." Miss Marple turned to the stopped clock. 2:03 a.m., 5 minutes slow, placing the murder at 1:58 a.m., shortly after Laura overheard an argument at 1:50 a.m. Someone, she said, used psychology to mislead us, planting clues to obscure the truth. She paused, her gaze lingering on each guest. The killer, Miss Marple continued, is here, and they betrayed themselves with a gesture too calculated. She stepped forward, her voice a quiet thunder. Shall we unravel this tapestry together? The trap was set, and the killer's composure began to fray, a single thread ready to pull the truth free.
Chapter 11. The Reveal. The Truth Unveiled. The drawing room of Ravenwood Manor was a cauldron of tension, the morning light filtering through heavy curtains doing little to ease the oppressive silence. The guests, seated in a semicircle, faced Miss Jane Marple, whose small frame seemed to fill the room with quiet authority. Inspector Hargraves stood by the door, his skepticism fading as her voice, clear and precise, wove the threads of the mystery together. Captain Hastings, his notebook trembling in his hands, watched in awe as Miss Marple prepared to unravel the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her eyes sweeping over the assembled, Philip Trent, Laura Ashbourne, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, Captain Ramsay, Lionel Gray, Clara Vernon, and Dr. Evelyn Carter, pale but alert. Sir Henry Ashburn's murder was a carefully staged puzzle, designed to mislead with false clues and hidden motives. But the human heart, like a village, cannot conceal its secrets forever. She recounted the evidence. The locked study, opened with a duplicate key stolen from Sir Henry's desk, the cufflink marked AR, planted to implicate Captain Ramsay, the forged ledger framing Trent, the cigarette burn pointing to Gray, the lavender scent, a deliberate echo of Laura's perfume, and the cryptic note with LG and "The raven flies at midnight." The stopped clock, 5 minutes slow, fixed the murder at 1:58 a.m., moments after Laura overheard an argument at 1:50 a.m. The atropine in Dr. Carter's sherry, marked with lipstick, suggested a desperate act to silence a witness. Miss Marple's gaze settled on Clara Vernon, whose face drained of color. "Miss Vernon," she said softly, "you are Sir Henry's illegitimate daughter, a fact he only recently acknowledged. You hoped for a legacy, but he hesitated to make it public. Your anger grew, did it not?" Clara's hands tightened on her notebook, her eyes wide. Miss Marple continued, "You argued with him at 1:50 a.m. as Laura overheard. You stabbed him with the letter opener, using a duplicate key to lock the study, creating the illusion of an impossible crime. You planted the cufflink, forged the ledger, and left the lavender scent to mimic Laura's, knowing her love for Trent would muddy the waters. The note with LG was a clumsy attempt to point to Mr. Gray." Clara's composure shattered. "He mocked me," she cried, sobbing. "He called me a mistake, unworthy of his name." She admitted slipping atropine into Dr. Carter's sherry, fearing the botanist had seen her near the study. The cipher on Sir Henry's desk, marked with legacy, was a draft will naming Clara, but his indecision fueled her rage. Hargraves stepped forward stunned as Clara collapsed in tears. Miss Marple's needles resumed their quiet clicking. "The truth," she said to Hastings, "is a simple stitch once the pattern is clear."
Chapter 12. The Reflection. Miss Marple's Departure. The morning after Clara Vernon's confession, Ravenwood Manor seemed to exhale, its oppressive air lightening as the truth settled over its ancient walls. The guests, shaken by the dramatic unmasking, dispersed to their rooms or lingered in the drawing room, their voices hushed. Inspector Hargreaves, his earlier bluster replaced by grudging respect for Miss Jane Marple,
oversaw Clara's removal to the local constabulary, her wrists bound and her eyes downcast. The Club of Mysteries, Sir Henry Ashburn's grand experiment, had dissolved into a somber footnote, its members eager to leave the manor's shadows behind. Miss Marple sat by the drawing-room's fireplace, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a pale blue shawl. Captain Hastings, his notebook now closed, joined her, his face a mix of admiration and exhaustion. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said, shaking his head. "How did you see through it all? The cufflink, the ledger, the lavender. It was a maze." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling. "My dear Captain, the human heart is like a village garden. It grows secrets, but with careful weeding, the truth emerges. Clara's rage was her undoing. Her gestures, her overdone clues betrayed her, as surely as a dropped stitch ruins a pattern." She paused, her needle still. "The lavender was too deliberate, the ledger too fresh, and the stopped clock, 5 minutes slow, told me the killer needed us to misjudge the time." Hastings leaned forward. "But the note, LG, and the raven flies at midnight, what was it?" Miss Marple's smile deepened. "A writer's flourish, Captain. Clara, the novelist, couldn't resist a dramatic touch, hoping to point us to Mr. Gray. But it was her own desperation that wrote her guilt." As the fire crackled, Miss Marple reflected on the motives laid bare. Clara's yearning for legitimacy, thwarted by Sir Henry's indecision. Trent's loyalty, smeared by a forged ledger. Ramsay's pride, wounded by accusations. Gray's debts. Mrs. Langley's old heartbreak. Laura's love. Dr. Carter's near-fatal curiosity. Each heart, she mused, has its own riddle, but the mind, properly ordered, finds the solution. By noon, Miss Marple gathered her things, her small suitcase packed with care. As she stepped into the misty Sussex morning, the manor loomed behind her, its secrets now quiet. Hastings offered to drive her to the station, but she declined with a gentle wave. "A walk clears the mind, Captain." With her knitting bag over her arm, she vanished into the fog, a slight figure leaving behind a solved puzzle and a village forever changed.